the East Coast. Ms. Canby serves as a director of the One Rail Coalition. She has led state transportation departments in Delaware and New Jersey and is a member of the recently appointed National Freight Advisory Committee. She has served as treasurer of the Massachusetts Bay Transportation Authority and Deputy Assistant Secretary of the U.S. Department of Transportation. She has also been a member of the executive committee or board of numerous transportation organizations, including the Transportation Research Board and ASTO. She is currently a member of Women's Transportation Seminar and serves on the board of the Minera Transportation Institute at San Jose State University. And we are delighted to have you in Michigan.
Thanks, Pasi. Welcome, everybody. Okay, great, thanks. I am delighted to be out here and congratulate you for organizing this conference today. I'm going to talk a little bit, I'm going to skim across a bunch of things for a few minutes. I'm going to talk a little bit about One Rail because most of you probably don't know what it is, but I suspect many of you, the organizations that you affiliate with, may be members of One Rail. A little bit about the Michigan Rail Network itself, some trends in the freight world. I'm going to leave it to Tom Carper to talk about passenger stuff at lunchtime. Review a little bit on the federal role and some of the policies that may or may not rise to the top in Washington. That's a different scene back there these days, I got to tell you. Anyway, One Rail. We came together about 4 or 5 years ago and bring together the owners, operators, suppliers, contractors, advocates, workers, and users of rail. And let's just see, anybody from NARP here? All right, NARP's a member of the One Rail Coalition. Advocates, rail advocacy groups. We have some of those, and NRDC, National Resources Defense Council, is a member of One Rail. Owners, Class 1 railroads, short lines. Who's here from that part of the world? We have some of you. Workers in the rail industry. All right, we're covering this coalition pretty well today. I think we've covered just about everybody, as you can see. And we also have some associate supporters from some of the consulting firms. Rail Supply Institute and the rail contractors are also members of One Rail. What are we all about? Why a rail coalition? Well, it struck me from my experience in a couple of state DOTs and being in the transportation business for a number of decades. Excuse the incomplete correction on this slide I see here. This trouble of going from Mac to PC is something I haven't quite got a hold of yet. Anyway, we thought it would be a really good idea to bring together all this disparate group of rail people who are either negotiating contracts or arguing about one thing or another, to put the entirety of the rail industry together and try and find places where we can speak with one voice. Other parts of the transportation system do this quite effectively. The highway industry is all together just about all the time arguing for more resources and more facility. We thought it would also be a good idea to have a forum where these interests in rail could come together and talk about issues and get to know each other and build some trust among the various rail interests. I didn't mention commuter rail. That's another member. APTA, the American Public Transportation Association, is also a member of the coalition for the commuter rail piece. And we work to identify benefits that meet everybody's needs. And the coalition itself is organized as a project of the Surface Transportation Policy Project, which is an organization that I ran several years before taking over this role. We are focused on elevating the visibility of rail and helping people understand better how it works. In Washington, for the most part, rail means Amtrak, and on the freight side, it means re-reg, dereg, antitrust, truck size and weight. Those are the issues that sort of pop in people's head. I think the American Association of Railroads was shocked when they did a survey several years ago to find out that the survey of influentials, they call them in Washington, less than half of the people they surveyed had any idea that the railroads were privately owned. They could not believe. It was 39% was the initial response. They just, whoa, this was a wake-up call. So they've been active as well in doing some very good advertising. I think we've all seen it over the years. We've also developed some short pieces, and I have some copies of a brochure that we put out that sort of pulls it all together, and we'll hand that out when at the appropriate time, maybe during the break. Anyway, so we've come together to do that, outreach. We're reaching out, why I love to come out to Michigan and other states that I've visited to start building a sense of getting a group together, and this looks like a perfect crowd to start doing this or picking up on what Joe was saying earlier that's already happening here in Michigan and what the MDOT is doing as well. But there's a lot of understanding that we need to build to help people figure out how rail freight in particular, but rail in general also just operates. It's different from the highway scene. I facilitated a conversation a year or so ago between some of the Class 1 folks and people from NACO, the National Association of Counties. And one fellow stood up and said, I don't understand. We got a business right here next to the rail line. Why can't we just get on it? I thought, we are thinking highway kind of operation, and it's not quite the same. So we really have some learning to do, I think, to help people understand the contribution that rail can actually make to the overall functioning and efficiency of the transportation system. I will say that our coalition, because it is as broad as it is, it's a fairly short list that we all agree on. And I'll go over some of those things in a moment. But when we do speak, we assure people on Capitol Hill in particular that the rail industry is behind this one and you don't need to worry. And we also help individual rail members work on issues that aren't cross-cutting or aren't in opposition to what other members may be interested in. We want to make sure that rail is really brought into the conversation about surface transportation. In Washington, we still hear quite often the reference to the highway bill, and sometimes transit's included, but rail is often not part of that conversation. We think that needs to change because rail is clearly very much a part of the transportation system and needs to increase its role because it brings huge benefits, not only economic growth and job creation, but mobility, energy benefits, climate-related benefits, and overall quality of life, except when you have to listen to a horn or get held up at a crossing, but that's a whole other issue. We clearly need, on the passenger side, a stable, reliable funding source for rail. Amtrak has lived maybe as much of its life without an authorization and an annual appropriations fight as it has with an authorization. So that's an issue, and there was testimony given recently before the House Transportation Committee where just about everybody who testified said we need stable, reliable funding. Now, how we get there in this particular climate, that's a whole other matter. But putting that in place would then, we think, help leverage public and private. And we want states to have some flexibility so they can, in fact, partner with railroads on freight projects. And many states, including Michigan, have figured out how to do that without a lot of federal legislation. But it would be easier if, in fact, we had that. So there's a lot that can be done on rail. We hoped when MAP 21, the highway transit bill passed last year, that rail would be part of it, but that title was too complicated to deal with in the context of that legislation, so it was dropped and there's almost nothing about rail. Let me just quickly review, and you all know this, and I don't need to spend time on it, but the rail network, important part of the transportation system. You see the national map of the Class 1s and then the Michigan piece, and we'll just go through this very quickly. Class 1s, short lines, A lot of connectivity in Michigan, as Joe referred, and particularly the Upper Peninsula. The passenger side of the picture is here with the 3 lines and a number of stations, 22 stations on the 3 routes that I'm sure Tom will talk about, and the overall national map of the Amtrak service. And then the commuter service that's under development down here between Ann Arbor and Detroit. Hopefully comes to life, and we'll add another logo to the map on the commuter side of things. Now, this means more than just service to the users. There's a lot of tonnage of freights originating and terminating in Michigan, and passenger ridership in 2011, this is all 2011 data, almost 900,000 riders. Now, there are direct jobs, freight rail, over 3,200, Amtrak, 150 some. The wages, those are Amtrak wages, not the passenger rail, not the freight rail wages. And the average wages on the freight side are about 108,000. That includes benefits as well. So these are good paying jobs. 2011, Amtrak did about 46 million of procurement in Michigan. So there is spillover from having a good, strong rail infrastructure in Michigan. And this is where the money comes from to invest in rail. This is national, and the figures are cumulative. The blue at the bottom is the Class 1 investment. The yellow is the short line. The lighter color in there is Amtrak. And then commuter, heavy rail, and light rail. And we include those because it supports the rail supply industries. So cumulatively, over $120 billion. And the railroads are spending about $24 billion a year right now on rail investment. So they are pouring money into their infrastructure. And in fact, a report that came out earlier this year indicated that the railroads were in better shape than other transportation infrastructure. None of it's great, but C+ was better than D, and others that they termed as not being very adequate. Now here is this other part of this story. Rail supply, which we don't often think about, you see the map up on the right, shows where rail supply facilities are. There are almost 2,700 facilities that we know about. We know this doesn't count all of it because this is just direct. You can't get the data to really capture this, but about 52 facilities in Michigan. And so this is part of the root structure of the rail industry. This is jobs that support what goes on in rail. So that's another part of the economy that rail helps to support. And people don't often acknowledge or understand the depth of the economic activity that rail can create in a state. And Michigan is a good one. You can see all those green dots located down there. Obviously, Illinois is loaded with this stuff, but it's a pretty impressive map because there's not too many places that don't directly support the rail industry. Looking at the jobs that get created by this, almost 400,000, and the 94,000 on the rail industry we know is a hugely low number, but you just, as I said a moment ago, you can't get the data for that. So this is another aspect of the rail industry to keep in mind, is the jobs that get created, not by those who operate the railroad, but the support in keeping that infrastructure going and the equipment operating. So that, I think, is a good aspect for economic development, people to keep in mind, that this is good all around. And it supports also the transit industry, the heavy and light rail systems and commuter rail systems around the country. So I think this is a good point, and it seems to be resonating when we meet with people on Capitol Hill as well. Now let me shift gears a little bit and talk about some of the trends. This is a slide from AAR that shows intermodal is the fastest growing part of the freight business at the moment. And some railroads, obviously, BN is doing hugely well in North Dakota with the Bakken and shale and all of that. But containers, and the yellow are the containers, the blue is the trailer, and the bottom part is the total intermodal. And what's happening is the shift from trailers to containers. This is national numbers, obviously, and domestic is really growing. And this is where I think there is a huge opportunity as an ex-DOT head for the railroads and the state DOTs to put their heads together and think about how do we really put together an efficient network on the movement of this freight. There's huge opportunities, and I heard a story anecdotally about a yard in Illinois that got built about 10 years ago. The trucks loaded the local streets, raising you know what kind of hell. And today, now they're building an interchange to get them off the local streets onto the main highways. So that kind of thinking can really benefit both the state pocketbook as well as communities, as well as the railroads. And as one of the class ones said to me, we build it, we operate it, and the state doesn't have to maintain it, and they don't have to pay for it. So there's a good deal here, and I think that there's some conversations that One Rail is trying to foster and that you could do and may already be doing here in Michigan to really think about the road and the rail networks together. Where can we really push to get the efficiencies that can happen when we think about them as one network rather than two separate ones that occasionally hook up and maybe not as efficiently as they might. And you can see, this is a map also from AAR, of intermodal facilities around the country. The dots in the blue above are in Canada, not off the map, I would point out. I wondered that when I saw it. But there's a lot of focus on these facilities right now. And I think that this is an opportunity for people to really think through how we move the goods, because the port picture that Joe painted is going to change some things as well. And figuring all that out is going to be a challenge, and one that is going to take us outside of our own state boundaries as well. And this is a table from the FRA, Federal Railroad Administration, that shows the distribution and data. Trust me, data in the freight world is hard to come by. It's really good. This is 2007, so take it for what it's worth. But it gives you a sense of where there is some opportunity. And obviously, when you get into the longer haul, rail dominates. But even between 1,000 and 2,000 miles, rail does not dominate. Now, maybe that's because they don't go where the freight is, but maybe there's opportunities where we haven't had conversations to explore where we could change and shift that market share. So this is something that I think is very important. And I think as the railroads see the changing energy market, coal dropping, and the intermodal growing, they're looking at their networks to understand better how to gain efficiencies and market share in other areas as well. So I think that there are some opportunities. Now, to understand where we've come from and how we got where we are, this is a chart that also Federal Railroad put together that shows since the late 40s and up through 2012 where federal investment has gone. Well, guess what the darker blue is? That's the highway. The lighter blue is air. The yellow is transit. And if you can see it, the little green is rail, passenger rail. And that starts in about 1971 when Amtrak was created. But this is the imbalance in the funding from the federal government. So we wonder why rail isn't really talked about. Well, it's not in the game, in the money game. And so that's a challenge because it totally tilts the conversation. Now that began to change in 2009 with ARA and the Tiger program, which I'll show in a second. And Michigan has received over $400 million to advance rail here in your state. And there are 4 other regions in the country, in addition to more in the Midwest, where this funding from the rail program has been focused. About 5 regions covering 65% of the United States population. So it is happening, and whether there will be any more in the near term, I would have to say right now, probably not too likely, but we keep trying to set the table for when the tide turns and we fund transportation fully again. Now, this is another area where Tiger has been, I think, an enormously successful program, competitive grant programs, and you can see where they've been awarded. Michigan has received one, and I would say step up to the table and don't let the rest of the country take this away from you, because it's a great opportunity to bring people together at the state and regional level to advance rail, because it is one of the funding sources. And this, I would say, in the appropriations fight that will unfold this fall, this program will get funding in 2014. How much? I can't say, but it is a total stalemate between the House and the Senate, so they will do some form of a continuing resolution, is my hunch. And Tiger was funded in 2013 to $450 million, and I would think the DOT will be announcing awards for that tranche of money sometime this fall. So looking down the path a little bit, some of the issues that are on the table right now are positive train control. A number of One Rail members would like to see the deadline extended from next December 2015 out beyond, and we do not have unanimity within the coalition because some people are reluctant to step out on that platform. I think it's inevitable at some point that the technicalities of getting interoperability for this is a little bit overwhelming. But the pressure is on now, and we'll see how, when, and whether and when this deadline is extended. But that is a very hot topic. If we don't have a rail bill, finding a right vehicle to make this happen will be more difficult. The rail industry clearly has its sights on the truck size and weight study that's underway now and due to be completed, I think, sometime next year, if I'm not mistaken. So that's a big issue. Funding, as I mentioned before, stable funding for Amtrak, that's going to be an issue. The competitive Tiger program that I mentioned, the railroad financing, RIF loans, there are a number of improvements, and this was an area where the House and the Senate actually got pretty close together in trying to reach some agreement on how to change this program to make it a little more friendly. And I think that that's one that could emerge whenever we see some rail legislation, which is a whole other question. And that's the reauthorization of PRIA, the Passenger Rail Investment Improvement Act, and the Rail Safety Act. They both expire at the end of next month. We won't have a bill before then, for sure. Whether we'll have a bill before the end of the year, I would say, is doubtful. I think the best path is to pair this authorization with the Highway and Transit Bill, and who knows when that will happen. It runs out September 30th, a year from now, but whether it'll get passed between now and then is anybody's guess. They will have to do some major pasting together if they're going to keep the highway program running, that's for sure. The states, and Michigan is one of them, working on rail freight plans in particular, and rail also, some others maybe. And so that will play into thing and creates an opportunity to really think about an integrated and truly multimodal, efficient network. The National Freight Advisory Committee, which Pasi mentioned that I am now, I don't know whether it's congratulations or commiseration, a member of, will be looking at a number of issues, and I think fairly shortly they will announce some subcommittees, and Kevin Brubaker is also another member of that committee from Chicago Environmental and Policy and Law Center. And we'll see. There are 47 of us, and we come from very disparate and broad range backgrounds, and let's hope we can pull it together and come up with something that makes sense, that feeds into the next authorization. One of the things that we're supposed to be able to do is to make recommendations to the Department of Transportation on the National Freight Policy and Plan. Now, the way it was written in MAP 21, it's all focused on the highway network. The Department of Transportation wants to make sure this is a multimodal effort. And I think that we will be able to do that because everybody recognizes it's impossible to think about freight if you're only looking at the highway network. And that just makes no sense whatsoever. So we'll hope that this can materialize into something that's useful, that generates a lot of conversation, and that actually produces something that makes sense for the economic competitiveness of the United States, which is clearly something we need to keep focused on. So to wrap up, I think this group coming together today is critically important because we really want to get conversations going on at the state level that engage people in thinking about the transportation network, including all modes, in different ways than we have thought about it before, because continuing to do it the way we've been doing it is not necessarily going to produce the results that we need to have in the world we're facing today. So coming together with a broad-based advocacy coalition in Michigan is a great step to help build a more balanced transportation. There is no doubt in my mind or in the coalition's mind that we can play a much greater role for rail in the transportation system. We need to have those conversations, and we need to level the playing field so that when a state DOT is making a decision, they can do it based on a really good set of economic criteria rather than, and excuse me if people are from the legislature here, but I have dealt with several of them myself, pressure from outside places that may or may not make the best economic sense. We don't have enough resources. Tom Donahue, the head of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, said, we're going to have to make some choices because we're not willing to put up all the money that we think we need to do all the things we want to do in our little modal silos. So how do we put some lateral bars in the pipes so that we really think about this as one network with different pieces that all work reinforcing a much better system? It can be done. It won't be easy. But there is clearly market for greater rail, and I think that here in Michigan in particularly, and Michigan clearly, based on what Joe just said earlier, is going to emerge as the leader in the Midwest, and that's a very encouraging piece. We have also on our website some success stories, and I would love to get one from this state to be able to use with people in other decision-making places to help them understand that rail really can create a lot of value. So with that, I will shut up and let you ask questions. Thank you very, very much.
Okay, we do have some time for questions, so let's get started here.
I'm from Canada. Doug Wilson is my name. In the oversight policy role in which you seem to circulate very broadly here, and we thank you for the nice talk you just gave, perspective that you have. I guess there's two streams here, and a lot of people are on the passenger side in this room, for sure, wanting to know how a lot of progress has been made in cooperation between the freight side, the Class 1s, and the Amtrak, and the passenger railroad operations. My question is, how do we inspire greater cooperation between the railroads, the Class 1s, and inspire confidence that there's no compromise there, that in fact we're in this together and that we can cooperate on a funding basis, and we're going through the same thing in Canada as well. We're not covered by the same regulatory system, and there's less regulation or oversight in Canada than there is in the United States. So anyway, that's an open question. Maybe you can address it a little bit.
Well, I'll try. I'm certainly not going to have all the answers. I'll guarantee you that. It seems to me that we need to come together and build a better understanding of what it means to be a privately owned company in business to make money, as the freight railroads are, and what it means to be a public entity wanting to provide service, because they're different beasts. And figuring out where the gears come together is conversations that are happening all over the place right now. And I don't think we yet have all the answers. As Administrator Szabo says, we have the best freight rail system in the world, and we're going to make sure we keep it that way. And we need also to recognize that there are huge limitations in the air and highway realm, and we have to figure out how to balance between the public and the private and what really makes the most sense. I mean, when you look at how the Amtrak legislation is written, that raises a lot of questions, I think, in some people's minds. There is not the financial incentive for the railroads, because the deal that Amtrak has does not fully reflect all the costs. And so where do we go with that? Maybe nowhere, but that is clearly one of the barriers. The fact that when you're in the marketplace, in the freight side, looking for business, who knew 5 years ago that the shale and the fracking, or maybe it was a little more than 5 years ago, was going to erupt and put a whole bunch of traffic on lines that may not have been as heavily used as they are today. So the private side has to be able to respond to its marketplace, and the public side has to figure out its market and how you really fit together. I mean, as an example, this is probably a little bit off the subject, but I flew from Detroit to Lansing last night. The flight in the air was shorter than the taxiing at either end. And I'm thinking, why do we not have a connection that could have put me on the train at the Detroit airport and taken me here? I mean, that length of flight is crazy. I just had some cousins of mine visiting from Paris, and they took the train to Brussels, flew to Newark, and they flew back to Brussels and took the train to Paris, right in the airport. We don't do that here yet, but maybe someday we will. It sounded pretty nice to me. So rethinking how the relationships are totally different, and we've got to try and figure out how to bring these two things together. The conversations are happening, and I'm encouraging them to keep happening. I'm working with a number of state DOT leaders and folks at the American Association of Railroads to foster more conversation. So that's not really an answer, but we got to start the discussion.
Maybe time for one more question before we get to the last plenary presentation. Scott, anything online? No questions? Well, I'm gonna ask a question. On one of your slides, I think the second to last slide, you showed that there's going to be national freight policy and plan. Now my question is, when do you see there's going to be national transportation policy and plan?
Oh, posse. Well, there has been policy in legislation. I was involved in creating a bill called ICE-T in 1991. That had a lot of policy in it. Nobody paid a whole lot of attention to it, and over the years it sort of dribbled away. I think we will get there in steps. We're not going to get there in one big, single, huge leap. The whole history of how transportation has changed has come in pieces. Hopefully, we have enough people who look at the end game and can see what the pieces need to be to get to the end game, is how I think it will emerge.
Okay. Well, thank you very much.